Thank you for joining me today. My name is Olivia Odero, and I am a licensed professional counselor as well as a co-founder at a.k.a. So today we are continuing with our investigation of Joseph's mindset. And today we're going to be assessing if Joseph's mindset was built through certain spiritual practices or experiences. So we are on part 3 of Joseph's life. So just to do a little bit of a recap, in part 1, if you've been able to watch it, in part 1 we talked about just the ability, like is it possible to actually have a thriving mindset, and we assessed Joseph's circumstances. He had been just sold as a slave into a foreign land by his brothers. Siblings didn't know if he would ever see them, so he was in very dark circumstances, and just his mind was in that place of questioning and a lot of things going on. I mean, just from our imagination. So this was part 1, and we were able to establish that despite circumstances going on around us, we're still able to thrive. Joseph was still able to thrive, meaning that there's something that can be gleaned from his life that can also help or assist us to thrive. So that took us to part 2, whereby in part 2 we assessed Joseph's childhood, and in assessing his childhood, we were trying to figure out, like, is there something in his childhood that actually helped him build such a mindset? And so, we went through the whole family dynamics, family structure, but lo and behold, his family life was more messed up than even, what we could have thought of. And there was no way that such a mindset could have come from that kind of messed up childhood. If anything, it was supposed to be, an opposite side. His mindset should have been the kind that was withering, but rather than that, his mindset thrived, which just intensified this investigation, because we're like, man, if this guy did not get this mindset as a child, then where did he get it? Because he is thriving in the darkest of circumstances with such a dark past. So today we're going to go into assessing, was he practicing some spiritual stuff, or was he having some spiritual experiences? And the reason why this is important is because research shows that people who practice spiritual practices or have spiritual experiences usually are able to have a kind of a calm, collected, and focused mindset. So it's like they're able to do a lot, they're able to thrive. Like that is the assumption that research has. And so today we're going to see if this is what was happening with Joseph. Another reason I wanted us to also just look into this area of spiritual practices is because it is usually a common prescription that most people will get. Like if you're undergoing circumstances like what Joseph was undergoing, it's usually not uncommon to either find it in books or be told by people that, go fast for X amount of days, or go pray in, I don't know if people pray in the mountains, but just go, pray for this amount of days, or read these certain books, read these verses, or do this devotional. So there's usually a lot of prescriptions. I call them prescriptions because sometimes we're given days, but then looking back, some of them are actually they're actually gotten from the Bible, like the Esther fast, or the Daniel fast, or the Moses fast. So all those things, sometimes they're prescribed to people when they're undergoing situations like what Joseph was going through. If Joseph was to go to his spiritual leader and he's like, man, I'm in a dark circumstance, and like all these things have happened to me, like on top of spiritual counseling, he would also be given certain prescriptions of spiritual practices to do. So this is why I wanted to go into this area, just to figure out, could this hold the answers of how Joseph developed his mindset? Because if it did, then we can emulate that. Because what we are trying to do, we're investigating. I mean, for me, I'm investigating because I want to know, what did this guy do? What was different about him that he was able to thrive in the darkest of circumstances? But not only thrive, he was able to, he was looked upon he was in such an enviable position. Like someone who is sold as a slave becomes a leader of even the people who have bought him. Imagine that. Like I'm like, I want that kind of a mindset. I want to know what he did. Tell me exactly what he did so I can do it too, so I can attain this kind of, this thriving, because I want to be fruitful. Like there's just that desire, I think, also for you. And so that's why we're investigating this, because if it is rooted in some spiritual practices or experiences, then we have the answer. So let's start out with his background. So Joseph comes from a lineage of spiritual giants. As you guys may know, last week we talked about his dad Jacob. So Jacob is one of the few people where, since the beginning of the Bible, since or the beginning of Earth, one of the few people who is talked about who had a lot of angelic visitations. Like this guy, since he moved out of his dad's house, is like the first night he moves out, he has a dream of angels ascending and descending on this ladder, and it's like he sees like Jesus, like he has this amazing spiritual experience. And then, like onward in his life, like he has other angelic visitations. This is a guy who fought with an angel. So, right, even before we go far, Joseph's immediate lineage just shows us that he is set up for having some good spiritual experiences, things that we read about, things that we dream about, his dad is having. So that is his dad, Jacob. Jacob also built some altars, and altars were used to worship God. People would sacrifice and worship God on altars. So that is Jacob. Moving one step ahead, we find Isaac, and Isaac is Joseph's grandfather. So Isaac, a lot is not told about him, but what I was able to find out is that he did build some altars, and then he also was one person who meditated, because we are told of an instance where his wife-to-be is being brought to him, and the wife-to-be, Rebecca, finds him in the field meditating. So we're not told much about that, but we know that meditation usually is just, people reflecting upon whether it's God or whatever. I mean, his mom had just passed away also. So there's a lot of things going on there, but we see this is usually a spiritual practice. It's one of the spiritual disciplines that is, put on the hall of spiritual disciplines. So Isaac was a meditator, and he also built altars, meaning he worshipped God through sacrifices. And then, so that's, we're going up. We're going to see, like, now the next big deal is Abraham. I mean, we all know about Abraham. We sing songs about Abraham, Father Abraham. Abraham is like you just bow down before Abraham. So Abraham, like Joseph, comes from the lineage of Abraham. And Abraham is not the only Abraham as we know him, but Abraham, even the Bible itself calls him a friend of God. I mean, imagine that. Just camp there for a minute. A friend of God. This is, when you think of a friend, when I think of a friend, it's someone you can text any time of the day. It's someone you can confide in, someone who you take advice from, someone who can speak into your life, someone who can change the course of, situations and all that stuff. And I mean, true to this statement, Abraham was able to convince God to, able to talk to God through some stuff. Like when God was about to go and, pass judgment to Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham was like here talking to God back and forth, like, hey, like, are you sure if you find this number of people, you're still gonna do it? Like that's how you talk to a friend. You're like, okay, are you sure about this decision? And this is Abraham. Like this is in Joseph's lineage. He had spiritual giants in his life, quote unquote, if we were to give them a name. So Abraham also worshipped. he built certain altars. Whenever God met him in a certain way, he would build an altar and name that altar after, the experience. So he also had visions, he also had experiences. So right here off the bat, these are just 3 generations above Joseph. I mean, I don't know about the other guys, Terah and stuff, but we'll just work with these 3. So right off the bat, 3 generations above him, Joseph is set up for spiritual success, right? He's set up to know the practices he needs to do. He's set up to have some spiritual experiences, which actually he does right before he's sent into slavery. He dreams. He has 2 very distinct dreams, and this is right before slavery. But right now, we're trying to figure out, did he have any spiritual experiences while in slavery? Did he practice anything while he was in slavery? So this is where we are right now, because Joseph is set up real well. Like one of those kids who have come from a family of pastors. You're like, I know they will be a pastor. Like there's no question about that. It's right there. So unfortunately, there isn't anything. I mean, if you find anything, please let me know. But I looked through my Bible back and forth, even turned it upside down. I was like, how come there is nothing? There's nothing stated about Joseph practicing any spiritual practice or having any spiritual experience while this was like almost 20 years, 13 years as a slave. Then he becomes, a leader. Like all these years, there's nothing documented. I mean, probably he did, but the Bible does not document anything. And this is very interesting. I found it very interesting. Like, in fact, the only thing that they mention about Joseph's spirituality was a divination cap, which is, makes him look very bad, because that was used by people who are, into magic and sorcery and stuff. So Joseph meets his brothers, and like that whole scenario, if you read that part, it's very interesting. That whole scenario, and then he puts this cap in his little brother's bag, and then like that's where we learn about this cap. It's his divination cap. So whether Joseph was divining or not, we don't know. But the thing is that is the only spiritual thing that is talked about concerning Joseph's life. So guys, I don't know about you, but for me, I was like, this does not make sense. Because the other thing is that, which I also found interesting, is that from the time Joseph goes into slavery, it's like God, like the image I had of this was interesting. It's like God just decided to invade Joseph's story. Because from the time he steps into slavery, every single verse, it's like, and God was with him. Blah, 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 and God blessed him. Blah, 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 and God was with him. You're like, okay, so how come, in our eyes, in today, like I was thinking, if this guy is not practicing any spiritual stuff, he's not having any experiences, like usually we do that stuff. I mean, from what my background's like, I do that stuff to be closer to God, or I do that stuff to be, to have more of God, to experience more of God and stuff, and just to open myself up to, whatever you want to use there. But it's usually seen as like, okay, probably God will bless me if I fast, or probably God will do X, Y, and Z if I, read this number of verses. I don't know, like it's sometimes interesting like that. But Joseph is not doing any of this stuff, but God is like all over his story. It's like God, it's like if God was to, if Joseph was to like be like, okay, I need some breathing space, probably he would, because God is all over his story from the time he steps into this foreign land as a slave, which makes it so interesting. Like why, how come he wasn't practicing any of these things? So if you guys don't mind, I want us to reroute and actually figure out this. Like, how come there were no spiritual practices that have been documented under Joseph's life story? Like, what is this about? Because it's, once again, I reinstate. Yeah, that's the word. I reinstate. It's important to learn these things because we live in a time where these practices have been prescribed as things that will help us be closer to God or see a difference in our lives. Or like, if you want to be more successful or whatever, they're usually prescribed. So I think it's interesting. I mean, for myself, I just find it interesting to delve into this route and see what is going on here. How come Joseph is thriving, but there's no record? No record. That's what I'm founding this on. There's no record written about anything he was doing spiritually. So the first question I had was, could it be that he was not allowed? Could it be that the Egyptians just did not want anything else other than their own gods? Could it be? I mean, that could be a possibility, because later on, Joseph is talking to his brothers about, like, when you guys come, say you want your own livestock, you want to go to this land, because Egyptians do not like farming and stuff, like they detest that or whatever. They don't want it near their vicinity. So probably that could have been, like, they did not like anything that is not familiar to them. And after all, Joseph was a slave, so him coming with like new practices, like, dude, we don't do this here. And after all, you are a slave, so you do things our way. So I don't know. This is just my assumption. So probably he wasn't allowed, so he couldn't do it. The second area that I also kind of wanted to think through, like, was it that he was too busy? Being a slave is unfortunately, it's not an easy life. Like, there's just so much that is put on someone's plate. So probably he was too busy. He couldn't do what he wanted. But then again, you think, building altars, it's not something that, you can just do as a slave in a foreign land, where you're like, okay, guys, give me a few minutes. I have to go build an altar here and worship, but I'll be back. So it wasn't probably feasible in that way. And then the other thing, someone might say, was it that he did not believe? Was it that, he just, after he moved to the foreign land, he was like, forget all that stuff? But we can safely remove that option off the table, because Joseph, this is very interesting, Joseph was able to perceive, not even perceive, like when Potiphar's wife came to him and was like, lay with me, Joseph was like, how can I sin against God? So this is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. The time Joseph was in existence, the law had not yet come. Like, Moses had not gone to the mountain. He had not gotten his tablets. He's not gotten his tablets. Like, everything had not been put down, that this is sin, this is not sin. If anything, all people knew was what, Adam and Eve had, as okay, you guys did not listen to God about eating the fruit. That is the only law that was present. But here is Joseph, way years, because it's 400 years before Moses comes into the picture. Years before Moses comes in, he is able to say, like, okay, this is a sin against God, and I wouldn't do it. So therefore, I mean, it shows that he had an understanding of who God is. He had an understanding of what was sin and what was not sin, even before it had been established in the law. That just means even Joseph didn't have a Bible, so he couldn't do Bible study when he was in the land of slavery. He couldn't do Bible study, he couldn't do all that stuff. So it's not that he did not believe, rather he just had it. I don't know. We don't know. I don't know how this man did it, but he had it. He had the law before the law came. It's like he hacked into the law before the law came. The last thing is that someone may say, could it be that he did these spiritual practices, but they've just not been documented? Well, that could be an answer. But the thing is that the Bible is so interesting to me. Like, the Bible addresses even the smallest things where you're like, did you really have to mention that? Like, did you have to go through all that? Like, the author of the Bible is like, this is important to me, I will put it in here. The Bible, goes to the extent of saying, okay, Daniel prayed 3 times every day. You're like, can't you just say Daniel prayed? Like, wouldn't that be enough? But it's like God is like, I want it to be written that he prayed 3 times a day. So when I look at that, I'm like, if the Bible finds it very important to put that Daniel prayed 3 times a day, how much more would it find it important to put something about Joseph's spiritual practices or experiences? Because if God is so concerned about just 3 times of prayer a day, then how much more, would he be willing to put, even if Joseph was like, okay, Joseph walked out of, the prison and went and just worshipped or prayed or whatever he did. So that's kind of like, I was like, I don't think they missed it. I think this actually happened. This guy was not practicing anything. So anyway, that now takes us to the last question. Could it be that these things that sometimes even in our culture today have been so highlighted and put on a pedestal, like if you do these things, your life will be awesome. If you do these things, you'll be closer to God. If you do these things, you'll have a thriving life. Could it be that these things that have been put on a pedestal as building blocks are actually not building blocks? Could it be that they're actually for another purpose rather than building a thriving mindset? I'm just wondering. Could it be that they're actually used by a mindset that is already thriving? I mean, when you look at the story of Daniel, I mean, his is another case to look at. But I'm just like wondering, some of these things that sometimes we have been put on our plate, because it can be piled on our plate, a lot of prescriptions, 40-day fast, read all the book of Mark, read all these things, or read all these devotionals and stuff, and you will see a change in your life. We've seen that, we've had that. Could it be that these things have been given the wrong priority, and so people use them trying to get a mindset that will thrive, and probably they see, a little bit of some traction, but then it comes to a halt, and then they're left in the same place wondering, what did I do wrong? What did I not do enough? And then sometimes, you try to do a 40-day fast and you're like, day number 2, you're like, I can't do it. I can't do it, I don't know how Moses did it. I don't know how Jesus did it, but it's like, I can't do it. And then you're like, okay, I guess that successful life is not for me. So I'm just trying to now bring it into a full picture. Like, could it be this is why all this happens? Because these things are actually not building blocks for a thriving mindset. Because if this is it, then we need to figure out then what are the building blocks for a thriving mindset. So anyway, someone might say, Olivia, are you saying that these things are not important? That is not what I'm saying. I mean, it's not even me saying it. I'm just telling you what I found in the Bible. But the Bible also shows how important these things are. So I'll take us 2 places before we get out of this route. Go back to Joseph. So the Bible points out 2 things when it comes to spiritual practices. First of all, as I spoke of Daniel, we see that, he had an amazing prayer life, prayed 3 times a day. We have Esther. Esther fasted, and she saw a whole nation was, able to be rescued, because her fasting apparently helped her be able to do something that she had no confidence in doing, which is interesting, understanding what the spiritual practice, the purpose of the spiritual practice in Esther's life. And then we also have Elijah. Yes, Elijah. Elijah prayed. One man, the Bible says one man was able to pray and end a whole famine. Like, he prayed the rain back. So it shows that spiritual practices have their place. So it's not saying that they're wrong, they have their place. But it's just interesting to figure out what place do they have in a believer's life. On the other hand, the Bible also points out the downfall of spiritual practices when they're done from a wrong foundation or from a foundation that is not stable. So, for example, in James, it talks about like people who do not receive anything in prayer because they pray from a place of double-mindedness. That is interesting itself. Like, what do they mean by double-mindedness? But the Bible talks about like if someone is double-minded, they will pray. They can pray a whole night. They can pray 30 days, but they will not receive whatever they are praying for because of double-mindedness. The Bible also talks about fasting that is done from a place of, their heart is not in the right place. So people who go into fasting, but their hearts are not in the right places, in Isaiah, it doesn't avail much. It doesn't do anything. And then the other one, which I also found interesting, is the Pharisees. Jesus told them, you guys, you read the scripture like you know the scripture. It's like, it's like scripture just spilled out of them. But yet, they missed the whole point of scripture. Like when Jesus himself, who is the Word, stood before them, it's like they couldn't recognize what they had been reading and meditating and memorizing. It's like they couldn't recognize truth when truth was standing in front of them. So meaning like all these things they practiced, but it didn't avail anything. And so that's why I just wanted to say, like, it's not that they're wrong, but it seems like they have a place in the believer's life. And that is another investigation for another day. But today we're going to get out of that highway, out of that reroute that we took, and go back to Joseph's life. So if after all this stuff we've just studied here about spiritual practices and all whatnot, I mean, we're still coming back now to the highway. How come Joseph was able to have such a mindset without any spiritual practices that is documented? I mean, when we get to heaven, we might ask him, like, dude, did you do something, that we didn't see, that wasn't written in the Bible? And, how come he was able to thrive without any spiritual experiences? Because once again, the importance of answering this question is that if we can find something in his life that can be emulated, then we are gold. We've cracked the code. We have entered into the realm of possibility, no matter the situation, no matter our surroundings, no matter the circumstances, no matter our background. It's like, bring it on. I'm good. I have everything I need to make it through the situation. So that's the importance of figuring out, how did Joseph come about with this mindset, this mentality that could thrive in any situation. And just before I end this video, I wanted to also make note that, even though we've talked about all those spiritual practices and experiences, it's only one case that we've observed. And, I gave you other verses, not necessarily verses, but other stories about just the whole spiritual practice and experience thing. But we've only studied one case. So, we can't make a conclusion based on one case. But so far, it's, to me, it's having like an amazing, hypothesis about like, how does someone build such a mindset without doing all these things that we or me have thought to be the building blocks of having an amazing mindset. So anyway, this is the end of today's video, because we're investigating one area at a time. But even as I end this video today, I would like to know from you, is there any other area you think I should go into, I should figure out? Because I have studied all the areas that I think I can study, and next week I have one more area that this is the last area. I have one more area that I think might hold the answers for us. I'm not sure. So we're gonna go to that area next week. But in the meantime, if you have any ideas of what you think could have helped Joseph build a thriving mindset, please don't hesitate to let me know, because I'm learning in this as you are. We're investigating and figuring out, like, how do people make it? and how can we make it? How do we get what we want out of life and live like the lives that we know we're supposed to live? So anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope that this was exciting for you as it has been exciting for me. In the meantime, keep thinking, keep searching, and I know that God will, shows us the answers, because the Bible says that it is the glory of God to hide a matter, to conceal a matter, but it is the honor of kings to search it out. So let's keep searching, because the answers are not hidden from us, but they are hidden for us. So thank you so much, and I hope this was a blessing.